Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Aid deliveries resume in Gaza as the UN warns supplies remain far below what is needed. Nicolas Sarkozy begins a 5-year prison sentence in a historic first for France. And the presidents of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan signed new deals in Astana, marking 20 years of cooperation. Let's go to the Middle East, where humanitarian aid has resumed flowing into Gaza after deadly weekend strikes tested the fragile ceasefire. The United Nations says both sides have recommitted to the truce but warns it remains on edge. Meanwhile, Hamas armed wing says it will hand over bodies of 2 hostages on Tuesday.
Humanitarian aid is flowing back into Gaza, signalling that the ceasefire, shaken by one of its deadliest weekends, is still holding. According to local health authorities, Israeli airstrikes killed at least 26 Palestinians, including women and children, after militants launched an attack that left 2 Israeli soldiers dead. The United Nations says both sides have recommitted to the truce, but warns the calm remains extremely fragile.
We are encouraged that the parties have reaffirmed their commitments to implementing the ceasefire in Gaza and commend the steadfast efforts of the mediators. We do, however, remain concerned by all acts of violence in Gaza and the reported attacks and strikes that took place.
The Israeli military says its strikes targeted Hamas, field commanders and weapons depots. But in Gaza, residents say entire families were wiped out. In Khan Yunis and Nusayrat, survivors searched through the ruins. One relative called the ceasefire meaningless.
They hit belts of fire while they were in their homes. This is the ceasefire, as you can see.
The weekend bombardment briefly halted aid deliveries. But by Monday, convoys were again crossing through Kerem Shalom, carrying food, fuel and medical supplies. For the first time, Israeli authorities allowed UN monitors to oversee shipments at the nearby Kisufim crossing, a move described as a welcome step for transparency.
And yesterday, for the first time, Israeli authorities allowed the United Nations to deploy monitors at the Kisufim crossing. This is, of course, a welcome development as it will provide us with much needed visibility into that segment of the pipeline.
The UN's humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, has wrapped up a visit to Gaza and the West Bank, announcing a 60-day aid scale-up and inspecting UN projects supporting displaced families. Regional partners from the Gulf and Australia have pledged fresh funding as international agencies race to reach those still without shelter or clean water.
US Vice President J.D. Vance arrived in Israel to assess the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which has come under strain amid renewed hostilities and accusations of violations from both sides. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Vance's visit would focus on security challenges and diplomatic opportunities as Israel continues efforts to implement the US-brokered ceasefire plan. Netanyahu also highlighted the ongoing issue of hostages, noting 16 deceased hostages remain in Hamas custody, while 13 bodies have been returned so far under the agreement. Sanae Takaichi has won a historic vote to become Japan's first female prime minister, securing majority votes from both the lower and upper houses of parliament. The 64-year-old conservative was officially appointed as the new prime minister by Emperor Naruhito, setting the country up for a decisive turn to the right. Takaichi is the 4th prime minister in 5 years from her Liberal Democratic Party. Also known as Japan's Iron Lady, Takaichi belongs to the LDP's hardline wing and is a protege of the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Our correspondent Laura Westbrook has more.
Known as Japan's Iron Lady, Sanae Takaichi is Japan's 5th premier in as many years, and so called because she is an admirer of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Now, she has pledged to make Japan's economy stronger and reshape Japan as a country that can be responsible for future generations. She takes the helm of the Liberal Democratic Party, which has governed almost non-stop for decades, but is now losing support. The Komeito Party was uncomfortable about Takeichi's conservative views and an LDP slush fund scandal and quit their coalition. That forced Takeichi to form an alliance with the reformist right-leaning Japan Innovation Party, and that was signed on Monday evening. Now, she has promised a cabinet with Nordic levels of women, up from 2 under outgoing Premier Shigeru Ishiba. Around 15% of lower house MPs are women, and corporate boardrooms are also overwhelmingly male in Japan. And she takes office as US President Donald Trump is set to visit next week. Details of a trade deal between Washington and Tokyo remain unresolved. Donald Trump has said that he wants Japan to stop Russian energy imports and to boost defense spending. Now, beyond Trump, Takeichi's many challenges include reversing the decline of Japan's population and boosting its flagging economy. She has said she wants to revive growth through tax cuts and increased government spending. And she will have a major task ahead of her: to rebuild the trust of the public in her Liberal Democratic Party. Whether Takeichi is the answer to LDP's recent unpopularity rests on whether she can quickly deliver results. Laura Westbrook for A News in Hong Kong.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has begun a 5-year prison term, making him the first former leader in French modern history to be jailed for corruption. His imprisonment has sparked protests, political debate, and questions about justice and stability in France.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy began serving a 5-year prison sentence on Tuesday, becoming the first former French leader in modern history to be incarcerated for corruption. 70-year-old Sarkozy was handed his sentence in September for criminal conspiracy over a plan for late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi to fund his electoral campaign. A Paris judge ruled that Sarkozy would start to serve time without waiting for his appeal to be heard due to the seriousness of the disruption to public order caused by the offence. France's right-wing former leader Sarkozy led France from 2007 to 2012. The investigation against him began in 2013, and during the trial, it was revealed that the politician's presidential campaign was illegally funded by the Libyan government. Nicolas Sarkozy denied his guilt and called the verdict insulting France. Shortly after he stepped into a car to head to La Santé, Sarkozy published a long message on X in which he claimed to be a victim of revenge and hatred. At the same time, his defenders expressed their intention to file an appeal. According to French media, dozens of prison officers have gathered outside La Santé to protest what they call a media imprisonment. They argue that Sarkozy's jailing highlights a broader crisis in French prisons and suggest the move is meant to set an example rather than being solely about justice. Also, Sarkozy's family has called for supporters to show solidarity with the former head of state.
We actually feel like the justice system is taking the power, and that's not good for France.
In any case, in France, justice should be served in the name of the French people. I don't feel like this is the case here.
According to French media, Emmanuel Macron hosted Sarkozy at Élysée before former French president heads to prison. In France now, it is becoming a matter of not only legal but also political stability.
French President Emmanuel Macron said a referendum to settle the pension reform debate remains a possibility. Speaking in Ljubljana, Macron said that Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu chose to propose a postponement to calm the political debate. but that the reform is neither repealed nor suspended. The reform that was rammed through the parliament without a vote in 2023 has been, in Le Cornu's words, suspended last week. Prime Minister's move came in an effort to win over support from the Socialist Party and thus survive no confidence votes.
The debate will have to be reopened, and I am pleased that the Prime Minister wished to reopen this debate at the same time, and that several union and employer groups have expressed their desire to resume it. And this must be done in a peaceful manner, because the issue of ageing will not be resolved by a compromise necessary to pass the budget. On this issue, the prospect of a referendum is possible. We still need to know what it will be about.
A man who shot and seriously injured Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico last year has been sentenced to 21 years in prison after being found guilty of terrorism. 72-year-old Juraj Cintula fired 5 shots at Fico in May 2024 when he was on a visit to Handlova, some 140 kilometres from Bratislava. In a Slovak court, Cintula denied trying to kill the Prime Minister, saying he had deliberately aimed away from his vital organs. Fico, who was seriously injured in his abdomen, has made a full recovery since. Cintula's lawyer said he would likely appeal the verdict. US President Donald Trump said he will visit China early next year at Beijing's invitation. Trump also said he expects to work out a fair trade deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
US President Donald Trump says he plans to visit China fairly early next year. Speaking during a meeting with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Trump praised his relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
I want to be good to China. I love my relationship with President Xi. We have a great relationship. I've been invited to go to China, and I'll be doing that sometime fairly early next year. We have it sort of set. But I think we're going to have a very good relationship with China. And again, they will threaten us with rare earths. I don't think they're threatening us too much right now.
Trump's statements come after a tense week in US-China trade relations. Trump recently threatened to impose an additional 100% tariff on Chinese imports, responding to Beijing's new export restrictions. During the meeting, Trump said the higher tariff rate would take effect on November 1st, unless both sides reach a deal, but added that he remains optimistic.
China's paying 55% and a potential 155% come November 1st, unless we make a deal. And I'm meeting with President Xi. We have a very good relationship. We're going to be meeting in South Korea in a couple of weeks. I expect we'll probably work out a very fair deal with President Xi of China.
Tariffs on Chinese imports currently stand at 30%. The White House has not yet announced exact dates for the visit, but Trump's planned trip could mark a turning point in US-China relations.
Monday's internet chaos left millions offline as Amazon's cloud platform AWS went down. From airline delays to leaving users unable to use apps like Snapchat and Reddit, the outage caused widespread disruption and forced businesses and people to scramble for alternatives. Now Amazon says its cloud service is back to normal, but let's take a look at how one outage on a single platform managed to ripple across so much of our online world and what it reveals about our growing dependence on big tech.
Imagine waking up Monday morning to find that thousands of websites and apps you rely on, from Snapchat to Reddit, have simply stopped working. That was the reality as Amazon's cloud division, AWS, faced one of its largest outages in recent years, showing just how dependent the world has become on a handful of cloud providers. By early afternoon, AWS reported that most systems had been restored, though some regions were still seeing elevated errors. After more than 9 hours of disruptions, applications gradually came back online as of 1 p.m. Eastern Time, but AWS acknowledged that some services were still struggling. Outage tracker Down Detector recorded over 9,300 reports at that time, higher than the earlier peak of around 5,800 reports in the early morning. The disruption caused widespread business interruptions, delayed flights for airlines including Delta and United, and blocked consumers and workers from accessing essential online services. The outage began at AWS's US East 1 data center in Virginia, its largest and oldest site, which has seen similar failures in 2020 and 2021.
So we live in an era right now where we are very dependent on the cloud providers, so we need them to be at the top of their game, and today Amazon was not.
Experts say the incident highlights how vulnerable global systems are when so many rely on just a few cloud providers. This outage is one of the largest since last year's CrowdStrike malfunction. Monday's event is a reminder of the risks built into a hyper-connected digital world and the economic consequences when major cloud systems fail.
Welcome back to A News. After weeks of tension, the UN says aid has finally resumed into Gaza, a rare moment of relief in a region still on edge. US Vice President J.D. Vance is in Israel to help reinforce the ceasefire, meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is reshaping the so-called Trump-Gaza deal into a broader regional play for influence, while France's Emmanuel Macron is calling for aid routes to be reopened as a matter of absolute urgency. To unpack this with us today is James M. Dorsey. He's a political analyst from Singapore. James, thanks for joining us on the program.
Always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with the humanitarian front. How significant is the UN's confirmation that aid deliveries have resumed, and what conditions made that possible?
It's very significant. I think there's no doubt that the United States has pressured Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to aid. We already saw that over the weekend. He first announced that it was halting all aid, and then 24 hours later said that it would allow aid to flow in. Clearly, Gazans are desperate for all the basic essentials of life, and the increased flow of aid is the only way to help them and supplying that kind of aid to them. Food, basic necessities in terms of housing, and of course medical aid.
Now, President Macron says reopening aid routes is an absolute urgency. Are we seeing Europe step back into the Gaza equation in a meaningful way?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, there are various ways in which Europe can step in. One is obviously contributing to the flow of aid, but also if we go back to before the Gaza war, the European Union was involved in the control of the Egyptian-Gazan border. For now, that border remains closed, but there is the possibility that if and when an international stabilization force is established, that Europe could play some kind of role in that.
Okay. And despite resumed convoys, reports suggest access remains heavily restricted, and as you very well outlined, the aid is so desperately needed in the enclave, just basic essentials. How fragile is this lifeline?
It's very fragile. At this point, the United Nations called for the opening of all crossing points from Israel into Gaza, as well as the Rafah crossing point that is the border between Egypt and Gaza. Israel has not yet responded positively to that request. The agreement essentially is that Israel would allow 600 trucks a day into the Gaza Strip. That was the amount of trucks that were agreed upon in the earlier ceasefire in January of this year, which broke down in March. 600 trucks are an absolute minimum. Gaza needs aid, and it needs it in vast amounts.
James, this isn't the first agreed ceasefire. We've seen them broken before, as you just mentioned. This one is very fragile as it is, and it's been violated just recently. Does the humanitarian situation still risk collapsing if the ceasefire falters again?
all ceasefires in Gaza have been fragile. This one may be slightly less fragile, or in any case, there's greater hope for dealing with the fragility because of the engagement of the Trump administration. You see the US Vice President and two senior US negotiators in Israel today to try and ensure that the ceasefire remains in place. Without a ceasefire, there will be no aid.
Okay, so let's hone in on the Vice President's visit. JD Vance is there. What's Washington hoping to achieve beyond symbolism?
Well, I think that for all practical matters, let's be fair, the exchange of the hostages, a partial Israeli withdrawal, and the renewed flow of aid, increased aid into Gaza, is more than symbolic. Now, having said that, the problem with the Trump plan, with the 20-point Trump proposal, is that it really is not a plan. It is a set of principles and objectives, and there are no terms or mechanisms for the implementation of those principles and objectives. In addition to that, while everybody, the international community, the Palestinians, the Israelis, Arab and Muslim states have welcomed the proposal, no one has really totally bought into it. It simply is the only game in town, and no one wants to get on the wrong side of Donald Trump. Having said that, Israel has only accepted or endorsed the first phase of the plan, and has made clear that it wants to postpone even negotiating a second phase of the plan. The Palestinians, Hamas, has made clear that it has only accepted part of the plan, including that its rejection of disarmament, for example. And the Arab states and Muslim states are wary of any process that does not have Palestinian legitimacy.
And how much real leverage does the US have then over Israel at this stage of the conflict?
In theory, the United States has enormous leverage. It supplies Israel with 70% weapon needs. It is a financial supporter and a significant political supporter. We'll see whether that leverage is put to the test as we proceed in this process of trying to get the Trump plan implemented, and in the talks that we will see today and tomorrow, and maybe in the coming days in Israel, between senior US officials and the Israelis.
And is Vance's visit a sign that the new US administration is recalibrating its Middle East diplomacy, or simply staying the course?
I think, again, that remains to be seen. The US, I think one of the fundamental problems that goes beyond the Trump plan is that the United States and Israel have a very different approach towards resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, different from the rest of the international community. That is to say that the Trump administration already has backed away from the notion of a two-state solution, which is the solution that the rest of the world envisions, and harking already back to the first Trump administration, thinks that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be resolved by improving the economic circumstances of Palestinians, rather than pushing for recognition of Palestinian national aspirations.
Okay, and what are Netanyahu's political constraints at home, James, as he navigates US pressure and coalition demands?
Well, I think that really depends on how Netanyahu evaluates the situation. One scenario is that the scenario that we've seen over the past 2 years, that the ultra-nationalist elements in the Israeli cabinet have restricted what Netanyahu can do and cannot do. That assumes that Netanyahu doesn't agree fundamentally with the objectives of the ultra-nationalists. Another scenario is that he can bask in the victory of having gotten the Hamas-held captives freed and achieved an end to the war, and then push for an early election rather than the scheduled election in October of next year.
Okay. Now, let's have a look at Turkey's play here. President Erdogan has reportedly turned the so-called Trump-Gaza deal into a strategic opportunity for Turkey. What exactly is Ankara's endgame here?
Well, Turkey has always had ambitions to be a primary Middle Eastern force, and obviously Gaza is one opportunity to do so. Turkey has indicated that it may be willing to contribute to a international stabilization force, something the Israelis are very concerned about because they fear that Turkey may support efforts by Hamas to regain control of those parts of Gaza from which Israel withdraws. Turkey has always been out front and somewhat militant in its support for the Palestinians, as well as, and in particular for Hamas, and in its criticism of Israel.
Okay, and could Turkey's growing involvement complicate US and Israeli diplomacy, or does it offer a potential bridge between regional actors?
I think it's going to be an issue that Israel is going to be concerned about. On the other hand, you have very close relations between Donald Trump and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And already there has been, Trump has indicated that in many ways he may side with Turkey rather than with Israel in differences between the two countries. Mm-hmm. So I think it remains to be seen how this will unfold. Mm-hmm. But there is a larger role for Turkey no matter what.
Okay. And James, with aid resuming now and multiple powers stepping in, are we witnessing the start of a coordinated international push or simply competing agendas here?
I think we're seeing both. With other words, we're seeing an international push to end the Gaza war, something that everybody agrees on. Mm-hmm. But then the subtext obviously is that various states have different agendas and are pushing those agendas. So I think you can see both of those processes occur at the same time.
Okay. James, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your insight and your contribution.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Welcome back to A News. The presidents of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan have met in Astana, signing a series of new cooperation agreements. Talks in Astana are focused on expanding energy, transport and digital cooperation as both countries mark 20 years of strategic partnership.
In Astana, President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, have been holding talks to strengthen their countries' allied partnership. The visit coincides with the 20th anniversary of the Treaty on Strategic Partnership and Allied Relations between Baku and Astana. The two leaders discussed expanding cooperation in trade, energy, and transport. A key highlight was the presentation of the Middle Corridor Development Project, the Trans-Caspian route connecting China, Central Asia and Europe. Officials said freight shipments from China to Azerbaijan are expected to triple by 2030, underscoring the project's growing importance. At the second meeting of the Azerbaijan-Kazakhstan Supreme Interstate Council, the presidents reaffirmed their commitment to political, economic and cultural cooperation. Talks also covered post-conflict developments in the South Caucasus, regional transport links including the Zangezur corridor, and new investment initiatives.
The opening of the Zangezur corridor will significantly increase transport and logistics capacity in the coming years. The Intergovernmental Commission recently held a meeting, and it was also very positive. Significant results have been achieved in strengthening trade and economic ties. Our trade turnover is growing, and we are very pleased with that, of course. The joint investment fund we established also has tremendous potential.
A series of agreements were signed and exchanged between the two sides, covering energy partnership, industrial property protection, healthcare, statistics and law enforcement. Memorandums were also signed on artificial intelligence, digital services, and the creation of a joint investment mechanism involving SOCAR, Azerbaijan Investment Holding, and Kazakhstan's Samruk Kazina Fund. The two leaders adopted a joint statement marking 2 decades of strategic partnership and outlining further steps to deepen bilateral cooperation.
Orkan Amashov spoke with Danyar Meirbekov, director at Kazakhstan's Ministry of Digital Development, Innovation and Aerospace Industry, to discuss the country's approach to artificial intelligence. Let's take a look.
Many nation states, European countries, are talking about digital sovereignty. They say you should be sovereign in all meanings of this word, also in the digital sense. To what extent the increase in the utilization of AI technologies serve that purpose?
Yes, I totally agree that the digital sovereignty is substantial, especially in the era of AI, because when we use, let's say, large language models that are such as ChatGPT or any other. So obviously any prompts that you input, it's already public. Any information you input there is already public. So in my opinion, throughout time, that's going to be also the part of the ethical aspect of using AI. That is why, in our opinion, that having your at least the solution would be to develop at a certain level some large language models that can be used locally and that can be stored locally in order to implement certain type of tasks that to kind of maintain the data privacy. Yeah, so in my opinion, that is a really important aspect to consider when using AI and implementing it in the spheres of our industries, economy, etc.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to you for your detailed answers. So grateful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The European Union and countries from the Black Sea and Central Asia have agreed to boost cooperation on security and connectivity linking Europe and Asia through new trade, transport and energy corridors. The deal was reached at a high-level meeting in Luxembourg with delegates from Azerbaijan, Turkey and Kazakhstan.
At a high-level meeting in Luxembourg, delegates from Azerbaijan, Turkey, Kazakhstan and others endorsed a joint plan to build a more stable, better connected and resilient region amid growing geopolitical tensions. Talks centered on the Black Sea's strategic importance, a vital route for global grain exports, energy transit and maritime trade. Participants discussed plans for a Black Sea maritime security hub to protect critical infrastructure, enhance Coast Guard cooperation and counter hybrid threats, measures Brussels says will also bolster Ukraine's security. The second part of the meeting centered on the cross-regional connectivity agenda, a plan to coordinate strategic investments linking Central Asia, the South Caucasus and the EU. It includes upgrading the Trans-Caspian transport corridor, boosting digital links through high-speed internet, and expanding renewable energy connections to diversify energy supplies and advance the green transition. Officials said simpler customs and digital trade systems could attract private investment and boost regional growth. For Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and other transit countries, the plan could turn them into vital bridges between Europe and Asia. It would strengthen their role in global logistics and energy supply chains. Brussels says the meeting set out a step-by-step plan for deeper cooperation, with details will be finalized at the Trans-Caspian Connectivity Forum in Tashkent this November.
Azerbaijan has lifted restrictions on the transit of goods to Armenia through its territory, a move President Ilham Aliyev described as marking a new era of peace between the two countries. The first shipment, Kazakh wheat bound for Armenia, will soon travel through Azerbaijan and Georgia. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's office welcomed the move, describing it as an important step forward, reopening regional transport links and strengthening mutual trust. Economy Minister of Armenia, Gevorg Papoyan, also hailed the development, noting that the first train carrying Kazakh wheat will soon arrive via the Aktau-Baku route. Peace has been confirmed, he remarked. Turkey and Kuwait signed 4 agreements in the presence of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Kuwaiti Emir Sheikh Michel Al Ahmad Al Jabbar Al Sabah. The agreements cover maritime transport, mutual recognition of seafarers' certificates, energy cooperation and direct investment incentives, aiming to enhance bilateral collaboration across these sectors. The signing ceremony took place following inter-delegation meetings at Kuwait's Bayan Palace. Kuwait marks the first stop of Erdogan's 3-day Gulf tour, which will include Oman and Qatar. Armenia and Turkey will soon hold an interagency meeting to discuss the restoration and reopening of the Gumri-Kars railway. Armenian Special Representative for Normalization with Turkey, Ruben Rubinyan, announced. In September, Armenian envoy Ruben Rubinyan met with his Turkish counterpart Serdar Kılıç in Yerevan to discuss bilateral issues. After the talks, officials said both sides agreed to start technical studies on restoring the Gumruk-Kars railway and the electricity interconnector. The goal is to repair and reopen these links for operation. The mayor of Gumri, Vardan Gukasyan, has been detained for 2 months on corruption-related charges. The court made the decision following a motion filed by investigators seeking his pre-trial detention. The case has sparked unrest in Armenia's second-largest city, leading to dozens of arrests during a protest outside City Hall. Tensions erupted in Gumri on the 20th of October when residents gathered outside City Hall in an attempt to prevent the arrest of opposition Mayor Vardan Gukasyan. The demonstration quickly escalated, resulting in the detention of 33 people. According to the Investigative Committee of Armenia, the detainees are being held on charges related to mass disorder and obstruction of justice. Earlier that morning, agents from the Anti-Corruption Committee, backed by police units, conducted large-scale operations at both Gumri City Hall and the mayor's residence. Gukasyan, along with the city's chief architect and 6 others, was detained during the raids. Investigators say the mayor and his associates are suspected of taking bribes to ignore illegal construction projects across the city. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei dismissed US President Donald Trump's proposal for renewed negotiations. He rejected Washington's claim that Iran's nuclear capabilities had been destroyed. Khamenei said Trump's approach was bullying disguised as diplomacy, criticizing the idea of talks conducted under pressure. His comments follow 5 rounds of indirect US-Iran nuclear talks that ended after a 12-day US-Israeli air campaign targeting Iranian nuclear sites in June. As countries and organizations welcome a ceasefire between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Pakistani media says a high-level delegation is visiting Kabul after a week of border clashes. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
The visit comes as the international community welcomes the ceasefire agreement between Pakistan and Afghanistan, calling it a major step toward easing tensions. Saudi Arabia hailed the ceasefire and new peace mechanisms, reaffirming support for stability and prosperity in both nations. The OIC and Muslim World League praised the move, saying it will build trust and spare civilians from further conflict. China welcomed the truce and promised a constructive role in improving relations, while Russia described the agreement as a foundation for regional peace and urged joint efforts against terrorism. Jordan and Kuwait also endorsed the accord, thanking Qatar and Turkey for their mediation, and Iran expressed hope the deal would help stabilize the region. At the United Nations, spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the Secretary General hopes the ceasefire will hold and called for diplomatic solutions to future disputes. UN Human Rights Envoy Richard Bennett welcomed the agreement as a vital step, offering condolences to the victims and stressing that international law must be upheld. For now, attention turns to Kabul, where Pakistan's delegation is holding talks, parts of renewed efforts to turn the ceasefire into lasting peace. Tamim Bahiz, Kabul, A News.
For the first time, the defence ministers of Central Asia have gathered in Samarkand, a landmark meeting that underscores growing efforts to strengthen regional security, build trust and expand cooperation in the face of shared challenges. Fariza Kalimurzina reports.
In Samarkand, the defense ministers of the 5 Central Asian countries met for the first time in a joint session. The talks focused on regional security, military and technical cooperation, personal training and the exchange of experience. One of the main focuses was on building trust between the countries. And in today's global climate of uncertainty and rising regional risks, this kind of dialogue is more relevant than ever. In an official address, the president of Uzbekistan stressed that in recent years, relations between the Central Asian states have reached a new level, one of strategic partnership and constructive dialogue. That partnership is now actively extending into the military sphere. A key topic on the agenda was the protection of the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. Ministers agreed that ensuring security along this frontier is a shared responsibility for all Central Asian nations. At the end of the meeting, a joint protocol was signed, laying the groundwork for deeper cooperation going forward. Meanwhile, defense spending across the region is on the rise. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan spent a combined total of $1.8 billion on defense last year. But Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan were not included in the report as they do not disclose their military budgets. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Welcome back to A News. A notable shift is underway in the region from confrontation toward connection. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has announced the lifting of restrictions on the transit of goods to Armenia through Azerbaijani territory, the first such shipment being Kazakh wheat bound for Armenia. President Aliyev called it a new era of peace. Meanwhile, Armenia and Turkey are preparing for an interagency meeting on reopening the historic Gumri-Kars railway, a line closed for 3 decades. And in Luxembourg, the EU and countries from the Black Sea and Central Asia, including Azerbaijan, Turkey and Kazakhstan, have agreed to deepen cooperation on security and connectivity linking Europe and Asia through new trade and energy corridors. Joining me to discuss is Nadima Rahimli, Deputy Chair for Social Welfare and Citizens Public Union, Azerbaijan, Baku. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, President Aliyev's decision to lift restrictions on goods transit to Armenia, can you talk us through the significance of this step politically, symbolically, and in terms of geopolitics?
Yes, of course. Today, Mr. President Aliyev's speech on it and his announcing that we have opened the routes, we have opened the borders for the Kazakhstan with Armenia has a profound meaning, both politically and symbolically. Politically, it shows that Azerbaijan is ready for peace, and we are not doing it as just in words, but we are doing in actions, in real acts like economic question. And this can be called a landmark political gesture by Mr. President Ilham Aliyev. Symbolically, also, it marks the first tangible step toward transforming confrontation into cooperation between two countries. Of course, it's not just about the transit, but it's about trust. This trust, we do believe that this trust will lay foundation for a new regional atmosphere built on connectivity and mutual benefit.
Okay, so you mentioned trust there, the first shipment being Kazakh wheat. Does that choice signal, what does it signal rather, about regional coordination and trust?
Yeah, Kazakh wheat also, like I can say that it has also profound symbolic meaning for it. First of all, like it's a wheat, as we know that for our nations, wheat is an emblem of peace, sustenance, and renewal. And of course, this shipment comes from Kazakhstan, means that we are not just ready for the bilateral cooperation, we are also eager to have multilateral cooperation, which will make also great role for Armenia in the economic cooperation. So also it emphasizes the Gaza corridor's role in Middle Corridor.
Mm-hmm. And can we, Nadima, view this as a genuine opening for economic peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, or more of a controlled preliminary effort, do you think?
At the moment now, in the initial stage, we can say that it's a both of it, because the economic cooperation, economic peace, of course, does not come at once. First of all, it needs to have some preliminary steps, like controlled preliminary steps. And of course, by each shipment, each corridor being opened, each shipment being delivered, of course, will reduce this mistrust and increase interdependence between the countries. So at the moment, in the initial stage, we can call that like it is both of it is a controlled preliminary effort and also the genuine opening for economic success.
Okay, and how might this decision shape Armenia's own regional positioning, particularly its dependence on routes through Georgia and Iran?
Yeah, we know that until it, Armenia just was dependent from Georgia and Iran, like it can only have some shipments and corridors through Iran and Georgia, but now it will make Armenia's role also be to be like in the center of this economic cooperation. Opening this corridors through Azerbaijan would diversify Armenia's trade routes and integrate it more deeply into the Caspian transport system, and of course create new economic opportunities for Armenia. When of course Armenia will have the chance, opportunities, it will also reduce Armenia's dependence on other countries.
And so would you say trade could become the new peacekeeper between Baku and Yerevan?
Yes, of course, the trade, as we know, the economic cooperation, the trade is always the main part of the peace building. Of course, it will need time for it, but as the people will see that the countries will see that, and especially Armenia will see that there is a benefit for them, and I think that it will be a good achievement, like for getting success and peace between two countries.
Okay, Nadima, on the next point now, on Armenia-Turkey front, what's driving the new momentum to reopen the Gumruk-Kars railway after more than 30 years?
Yeah, we know that after 30 years, as it will be open, there will have the shift in the region, in the total region, because Turkey is now looking to deepen regional integration. Armenia wants economic normalization, and also their partners like European Union also are supportive for it. And reopening the Gümrük and is not just opening the railway, but it's also rebuilding bridges between these countries, between Turkey and Armenia as well. And Gümrük Kars line would also symbolize the bridge between two nations and between two countries.
And what economic benefits could this bring to both countries and the wider South Caucasus?
Reopening the Gümrük Kars line, of course, will be transformative. For Armenia, it would provide direct access to Turkey and European markets. And for Turkey itself, also, it will strengthen its role as a regional hub between Europe and Asia. If we look at the wider to the South Caucasus, it enhances supply chain resilience. It creates new opportunities. It creates opportunities for tourism, for cultural exchange, for manufacturing, and so on. So we can see that after opening the Gümrük Kars line, it will be transformative for all the countries that's on this route, on this line.
And how intertwined do you think are these parallel openings? So there's Azerbaijan-Armenia transit and the Armenia-Turkey rail link in building regional confidence.
Yes, I think that both of them are interconnected because both initiatives reinforce the regional shift toward pragmatic cooperation. Each successful opening boosts confidence in others, showing that dialogue, we need dialogue, not isolation, and these dialogues will bring the results. Collectively, they could anchor a new transport of these ways, routes can anchor a new transport architecture, linking the South Caucasus seamlessly to Central Asia and Europe.
Okay, now let's turn to the Luxembourg meeting. What's behind the EU's renewed interest in linking Europe and Asia through the Black Sea and Caspian corridors?
Yeah, especially after Russian war, now European Union seeks for the more consistent, more sustainable routes, more sustainable cooperation, and that's why they're also want these routes to open. European Union recognizes that secure and diversified transport routes are strategic assets for them as well, and the Luxembourg meeting underlines the European Union's intent to strengthen the ties between the Central Asia and the South Caucasus, and somehow, of course, it will reduce their over-reliance on the routes through Russia. It's about creating a modern connectivity network that aligns with sustainability, transparency, and economic resilience.
Okay, Nadima, that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time and insight.
Thank you so much.
Now you're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.